add value to your business, or do you want to just be this administrative person?
And often, if you look at your talent team and the caliber of talent in your company, they correlate.
You could hire the best person for the job if they were in your candidate pool.
All these individual employees, one by one, together, their voices all come together to articulate the culture of the company.
This is hiring.
Hiring on all cylinders.
As we embark upon another classic installment of Hiring on All Cylinders, I am joined on my left by Head of Customer Success, Lonnie Spratt. Lonnie, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, Rob.
What's going on with our legion of recruiter customers out there?
Well, same-o, recruiting as always.
Yep.
But I would say, our customers right now, we have many of them focused on, some key things. I would say for many of them, diversity is still as important this year as it was last year.
Good.
And I think what we're starting to see and kind of hear from our customers that are focused on these diversity initiatives, and these are, large and small customers. It's not just the big companies trying to move the needle around, diversity and inclusion. It's smaller companies too. They're trying to find a way to kind of quantify their improvement and their success. So we've been having some really thoughtful conversations around those areas in terms of what they should be tracking, how they should be measuring, and to determine that improvement over the last couple of years since they've been rolling out these initiatives. So that's been really, really fun. And then I would say alongside that, we see a lot of expansion within our customers. A lot of one in particular just told us that they're going to hire 50 more recruiters
Nice.
in the next month. And I'm like, wow, how do you go about doing that, right? When you have, clearly you have hundreds of recruiters already, but how do you go about hiring 50 more recruiters in such a small time frame, and then also keeping the same kind of caliber and level of recruiter that you have? And so normally when we're working with customers, we're talking about filling all of their tech roles and their sales roles and marketing roles and all these other challenges that they're like, we got to go find this hot talent. And the recruiters are the ones finding talent. Now we're working with these customers like, how are you going to go find 50 recruiters, and how are you going to hire them? And how is that approach different than going out and hiring 50 more engineers or 50 more salespeople? So it's a really unique conversations that we're having.
Yeah, and I imagine recruiting recruiters would be a little bit like recruiting sales in that they'll take the call, right? They'll be like, oh, here's the head of talent at this cool company. Like, I'll hear what they got to say. I'll hear about their recruiting process. I'll see what's going on over there, just to sort of keep their finger on the pulse of the market. So that could be exciting and also a little frustrating, I guess, if people might take your call even if they don't have explicit intent. But yeah, that's awesome. Recruiting recruiters.
Yeah.
Who knew? It's
been great. And it's funny because we work with so many customers now, we see a lot of shuffling around. So we see, we hired these brand new people and then we need to get them on Intello. And we're like, great, we're going to show them how to use Intello. And they're like, oh no, I've already used it at my previous, 2 companies. And we're
great.
like, oh, awesome.
Even better. Yeah.
Even better. So we're starting to see that happen much more frequently now than, in the past, which is really nice. So, there's definitely some shuffling happening amongst our customers.
I love it. Up and to the right. Speaking of Intello customers, seamless segue. We are also joined by one Bailey Douglas. Bailey was a tech recruiter at Ripple, Airware, and Affirm, and currently she is sitting as the Director of Talent Acquisition at Mode Analytics. Bailey, so glad you're here. Welcome.
Glad to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
I love it. We have not only an Intello customer, but also a podcast fan in the house. It's really warms my heart because this is my favorite thing I do at work. So
great.
Well, glad to have you. So you have just a heroic amount of roles to fill right now. Is that right?
Yeah, I have really significant headcounts across the board, from sales to marketing, analytics, engineering, pretty much the entire spectrum of roles. And I'm hiring recruiters as well.
Cool. So what's the talent team recruitment that you're gonna like? What are those recruiters you're gonna look for?
Yeah, so I have a really great tech recruiter I've worked with in the past who is already signed. She starts on Monday, so that's going to be great. And then I'm looking for sales and sort of a SG&A recruiter, as well as a coordinator. So kind of a situation where I want to find a team that complements each other, and I'm not so hung up on a profile as I am on the results that I need to have them achieve together. So kind of a puzzle I'm putting together.
Interesting. So you have like all these open roles, and then you're going to build a team that you think can work together, even if they haven't like specifically recruited for those roles. Is that right?
Right. I mean, I think across the board at Mode, we try to be really outcomes oriented in our hiring. Every intake meeting we take, every sort of kickoff is first and foremost, what do you need this person to do? And then we kind of go backwards from there about what we need. I find that gives us a lot more kind of diverse and interesting candidate pool, and it also helps us be a little bit more sort of thoughtful about what success actually will look like once that person's on board.
Yes. So then you sort of work backwards to the job description. Is that right?
Right. And essentially, I'll write, especially for a recruiter role like this, where I probably want one senior, one junior of the two we're hiring, but I don't really care which is which. Like, I'll write a wide variety of really kind of vague job descriptions, and send them out there and hope that we get a couple people who will be a nice complement and we can hire them as a team in a way that, they're going to be teaching each other and they're going to be learning from each other as well as from me when they join.
Cool. So going back to the intake meeting, so you would take this hiring manager, and then you mentioned briefly like you would think of what success looks like in the role. So what is that sort of, as you're sort of trying to draw out of the hiring manager, what does a great candidate look like without just explicitly asking them that? Because it sounds like a lot of them don't really know, especially if it's not like a role they've recruited for a bunch of times.
Or they think they know and it's way too specific to either be helpful for the market or allow our pool to be as diverse as we want it to be.
Okay.
Right.
So is that almost worse, being way too specific than being too vague?
I think so. I've definitely been in a position, especially when I was a little bit less able to push back on hiring managers than I feel like I am now, where I would sit down and I would get a list of must-haves that are, 12 bullet points long. There's probably 10 of those candidates in the Bay Area or even in the United States if it's a, very senior level role and I'm talking about relocating people. And really when you go backwards, you can find out actually what you want is for the person to achieve these results. And a lot of these bullet points that you have as must-haves are really like positive indicators, but there's other positive indicators we might not have thought of, and these are not the only positive indicators. The absence of a few doesn't mean that person isn't going to be a slam dunk. So you want to be as kind of like welcoming as possible in terms of your initial description and really evaluate the candidates against a record of achievement and creating results, whether that's building a piece of software that does a certain thing or, something similar to what we need it to do, or whether it's, sales or recruiting, closing, whether it's, making Marketo work in the way that you need it to. There's a really wide range of, what that could look like. But if you focus on ultimately how we're going to get success as a company from this hire, you open yourself up to a much wider subset of the population. It's easier to fill the role, and you're much more open to a candidate that might not be the traditional Silicon Valley, profile of who works at a lot of the tech companies.
Yeah. So then when you separate must-haves into positive indicators, would you still keep all of them in, like, not necessarily the job description, but I guess in the minds of interviewers? And like, is that like a designation you make?
Yeah. So I have two job descriptions. I have a public-facing job description that's on our website. That's an ad. That's, this is what you'll do in the role. This is why we have this person here, and this is why it's important to like what Mode does and what our, product direction is. Then we have, and then bullet points on, what you'll do and what we look for is how we kind of break it down. Nice to haves don't really make it on to the job description at all because we've found, and I think there's a lot of data and from a variety of sources that supports this, that, women and people of color are a lot more likely to filter themselves out if they see criteria that's, a little bit different from what they have, and like white men will just apply for everything if they have half the things that they're asking for.
Right. So the more things you put on that job ad, which I prefer using job ad to job description, because the goal of a job description is to get someone to click on it, right? So like a good ad is something you click on, and then in that case, the more things you put on it, the less people are going to click on it, right? They're going to self-select out.
Right.
So HP released some research around this because they ran an internal study because they were trying to find out. They were actually running a study on internal promotions. So figuring out like why they had fewer like kind of female promotions into like higher leadership roles within the company. And they were trying to determine like why is this the case? Is it that we're not providing these opportunities for them? Is it that, like what's the reason? And so they started to run surveys and really talk to the women to say, to figure out like what was happening. And what they found was that these women weren't even applying. So it wasn't like they were applying and then just getting passed up on these opportunities, because
Right.
that's a completely different problem. But these women, in fact, weren't actually even applying for the roles. And so then they came to these women and they said, well, why aren't you, even applying for these roles? And it's that exact thing that you just said, Bailey. They were like, well, I didn't meet all of the requirements. I mean, the job description said these 20 things and I didn't meet those 20 things, so I just didn't apply.
Right. Yeah. I must not be a air quotes good fit.
Right. And it's like, they just like, I just thought it was going to be a waste of my time. And, you might, and then, but men, they don't have that, right? The men, at these companies, if there's the same 20 things and they meet like 5 of them,
Right.
like they're going to still
Shrug,
apply.
click, yeah.
And so they're like, well, is this a confidence thing? Are women like not confident and men overly confident? Or is this just, is this something else? And so they completely changed up how they were, thinking about their job description and making them a little bit more vague, kind of leaving off all of those nice to haves. You see a lot of these companies putting a lot more thought into their job ads or job postings. And you can see the actual results of it in terms
Right.
of the different types of people that you have applying.
Right. And
Yes.
from an HR perspective, you do often need a job description, but that job description doesn't have to be the ad that you're posting out to get people in. What's on your internal like platform and what you're showing candidates in terms of what their actual expectation is once they're on site and you're signing an offer can be a different set of things. And in terms of the recruiting question, you asked if the recruiters have sort of the nice to haves in the back of their mind. We use structured interviewing at Mode, so people are generally having the same interview experience across the board, and we've described what good and bad answers look like, and those are kind of correlated to the nice to haves. So it's more like looking for interview questions and understanding what like a good answer to like a situational or behavioral question is,
Right.
than like the checkbox list. I found the list works really well if you're working with an agency, which I do only on very niche hires, because if you give them a job ad that's really broad, you'll get the kitchen sink.
Yep.
But if it's from a regular source, I don't give that whole list to sort of the recruiting team. It's certainly part of the conversation in an intake meeting, but some of my team's role is to tell the hiring manager, this is a thing that seems really reasonable here. This is what we know about the market. This piece that you're asking for here might not be as likely if these other things are going to be pieces of this person's job that you need them to achieve. And having that sort of gravitas and respect for the recruiting team makes that work.
Right. Right.
I'm a huge fan of structured interview process. I mean, we're now doing that at Intello, I think, across the board for all of our roles, to my knowledge, and it's just been it's been like a game changer for us. I mean, our interviews process now they're way more efficient. Our scorecards that we fill out for candidates after are so helpful. I mean, I just think back like before, like I would get a scorecard in from someone who interviewed someone and they would say, I'm a no on this person. We didn't mesh well. And
Yeah,
I'm like,
not
what
good
does
enough.
that mean?
Not good enough.
That is not good enough. Like, we need to focus our interviewers and have them, focused on key things and have them focus on the same key things across, all the different candidates that they're interviewing. You can't have them focus on like these core competencies with this candidate, and another candidate comes in, they're focused on different things. You're not, getting a really good holistic picture. So that was one of the best changes that I think we made here internally too. And it's just really helped us get through the hiring process faster.
When you say structured, does that just mean like you designate each person, the goal of your interview is to assess for this, or is it as detailed as like, here are some sample questions you should ask and here's what the right answer is?
That one.
Really?
It's the second one. Yeah. Our engineering team asks the same like few questions every time. I probably shouldn't say that because it'll like end up on the internet and all the answers will be there. But we, have the same few questions. Some of them are, going to be like a practical question where you're working through a problem together. Some of them are questions that are more like, show me about your current infrastructure. Let's talk me through the technical decisions that you've made and asking follow-up questions. But yeah, I have Greenhouse set up to reflect each of the questions that you should be asking and what the answer was and why it was a yes or a no in terms of whether the candidate passed, because otherwise, I've actually even been discouraging my interviewers from Googling candidates in advance or like looking at the resume too far in advance, which is sort of counterintuitive because you want them to, of course, to have looked at the resume and be prepared. But if you see, hey, this person went to my alma mater, or like
Might bias.
Whatever. Yeah, the unconscious bias is incredibly prevalent and dangerous. And even, Mode is the most progressive, thoughtful about diversity, inclusive company I've ever worked at. And we make mistakes all the time, and we're trying hard to avoid that. But I think unconscious bias is always a part of the process, and educating yourself about it and being aware is the most that we can do. But, or the least that we can do, I guess, is really the answer.
It's at least the first step, in alleviating it for sure.
Definitely, because you're not spending the whole interview talking about your alma mater, right? And walk out of the interview, yes, we should hire that person.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like you're very structured. You know exactly what questions you have to ask, and you have to report back on the answers for that you got from those specific questions. So it really helps. It doesn't completely eliminate the unconscious bias, but it really, really helps.
In the event that you have a structured interview process and the questions and the correct responses are regimented, what's the value in even having multiple people interview them?
Well, there's a lot of stuff you have to cover for most of these roles. We have our SDR candidates go through a much shorter process than will our candidates for management roles. There's, fewer things that we're trying to assess in terms of an entry-level hire. But there's different people on the panel who have expertise in different areas. I think it's really important to have cross-functional interview panels in general, at least at a company like Mode, where everyone is working with people on different teams. There's no one who just exists in a silo. And it's not that there's one correct answer that's acceptable. I think a lot of the best interviewing questions are about previous experience and how people have dealt with different situations and experiences. So it's not like there's one way to describe, like, tell me about a time when you dealt with a performance problem on your team.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of follow-ups that need to be asked by a real live thinking, person there. When my whole team went to interview training to learn about how to ask those follow-up questions in the smartest way and to make sure that they're, active listening and getting the information they need. So I think the whole process is definitely still necessary.
Yeah, of course. And then also, I guess unconscious bias is another reason, right? Just to make sure they're meeting with diverse group of people so that any one person's prejudices don't color the entire evaluation.
Totally. And again, at Mode, we'll call people. We have a debrief after every candidate leaves where we talk about how the interview went. And you're not allowed to go to the debrief unless you've completed your scorecard. And if you haven't, you're publicly shamed and you have to talk first. But we've definitely had a lot of experiences where we've called each other out on our biases and said, hey, did you actually hear that? Or is that something that we're reading into here? And we have an environment of trust at Mode where we're able to do that. And it's I remember when I joined the team, it was a really kind of a shock to me, and it is a little uncomfortable to have those conversations, but I think it's really important working somewhere where I can say to, someone who's on the founding team, or, someone who reports to me can say to me, hey, can you think about what you just said? Where did that come from? Can you dive into that a little bit more? I'm not sure I understand, and that's important. That's a big deal. I think it's like probably one of the main reasons that I'm really happy to work where I work.
Not to drag us back to something we talked about 20 minutes ago, but this question's been on my mind the whole time and I didn't want to interrupt. At an intake meeting, for example, you could look at a hiring manager's list of must-haves and probably immediately know what was and wasn't, right? Or at least have a good idea, like that's not something we should put in the ad. Like I could bring a candidate forth who didn't have this, and they could be great in a bunch of other areas, and the hiring manager would still want to meet them, which means that thing is not a must-have. But you probably can't just say to the hiring manager, this isn't a must-have. Right, they'll probably push back. So, like, what's that process of showing a hiring manager that what it actually about a role is important?
Yeah, I mean, I've spent the last year and a half building trust with the hiring managers on my team, so this is definitely an easier process now than I think it was initially. But I think a lot, and I mean, so now really what it is me kind of going through and asking, hey, do we need this? What about? And I will usually take a look at the internet and come up with some profiles before to show them, like, what about this candidate who doesn't have that? Would you want to talk to this person? And they'll say, oh, of course I would. And then we'll agree that it's not a must-have.
That's the move right there.
Those people is good. But there's also just sometimes it's like, okay, well, you can have these be must-haves when you bring a candidate in and you're trying to make a hiring decision if you really think that's what has to happen and you kind of know what the answer is going to be longer term. But the job description is my problem. I'm the one who's reviewing the inbound. So if we get a lot more people because our ad is a little bit friendlier, like, that's my problem, not yours. And don't you want the best candidate? And no one argues with that. No one's, I try to, for example, I've taken out years of experience on almost all of our ads. And at first there was a ton of pushback, and then it didn't matter because the candidates they were getting were still good and had generally the right amount. And, if there's someone who was like almost there who wouldn't have applied otherwise, thank God we got to see that person. So
right. Yeah, I'm not sure I've heard of a recruiter doing that, like taking off years of experience, but it makes sense, right? It's like 5+ or minimum 5+ years. Like, all right, if they're a smart, great candidate, then there's not going to be a huge difference between 3 and 5, right? Or 4 and 5. Like, they're gonna pick up on that in a few years. So, and then that's another example of keeping that in there is another example of just another area where someone would self-select out. Right.
I mean, and it's not that I'll never use years of experience. I don't think I have any roles on the site right now that have years of experience. But if what we mean is 10, I might put 5, something like that. Okay. So that it's and the titles will also self-select people out to a certain extent. Like, I'll write senior if I mean senior, and things like that. If it's sort of we would take senior or junior, I usually won't add senior because I think senior people, if they're interested in our company and what we're doing, will generally apply for the open role. Yeah, if it's like a very like an architect level role, I'm not gonna say like you've built a web application. I'm gonna obviously have a much more stringent thing. It'll just be softer. Yeah. I also love that tactic of like that preemptive sourcing you do. So when you look at something and like, all right, I'm going to go out there and find an awesome candidate who doesn't have this part of it and then show them to the hiring manager. And they're like, okay, so you would want to talk to this person, right? Then get rid of that thing. Right. That's really clever. Thanks.
You said you put everyone through interview training.
Mm-hmm.
What was that process and how did it work out? Like, how did you get the results from it that you wanted, and how receptive was the team when you were doing that?
Yeah, so it was really good. We used a outside vendor who does interview training, and he came in and he basically spent 2 hours with the team. He has kind of fun. He does improv, comedy-based training. He does a lot of different stuff, but he has an interviewing one, which is all about structured hiring. And so it's like lots of things like working backwards and saying, how would we hire, like if Mode were going to hire a dog walker and a chef, like how would we build those job recs? And you go through the process of like kind of what you look for and what the results are, and understanding all of that so that people understand the kind of process. And then a lot of it in terms of building questions and situational, behavioral, all the different question types is just teaching everyone the vocabulary and making it so that when we're having, because we'll usually have a little meeting like 10 or 15 minutes before we start interviewing for a role with the whole interviewing team, where we go through what the hiring manager wants them to ask, and he or she will say, hey, can you come up with like 4 situational or questions about this thing, and we'll have a document with those that finds its way into Greenhouse before they will come on site. But having that shared vocabulary across the whole interview team was really helpful. It's been about a year since we did it, and I think we have some new interviewers. We had 3 sessions. It was like small groups, but we have some new interviewers, so I might bring them back. It was important, and I think I could have given the training in a lot of ways, but I also think it's sort of a refreshing thing to have, like, I'm lecturing the team about filling out Greenhouse and all that all day long. Having a different person come in and say, hey, this is important, is kind of a nice thing as well.
Yeah, just mixes it up a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, I like that. So what was the reception where people, like, I would imagine that, like, so was this training for like team members, like individual contributors, or
everyone who interviews?
Okay, so even like for recruiters as well?
At the time, there were just 2 of us on the recruiting team, and we went to all of the trainings because we also wanted to make sure that like he wasn't saying anything crazy that we didn't agree with. So we were active participants.
And hiring managers too.
Hiring managers, of course. Yeah, everyone. And the reception was good. Again, I think I've built a lot of trust in the team, so people were excited. Some people kind of came out of it saying they hadn't learned that much, which is fine. They were better at interviewing afterward, and were coming up with the questions the way I wanted them to. So I don't really care if they thought it was a great 2 hours in terms of, like, they all said it was fun. So that was a win. No one was mad they had done it. But some people were like, oh, I just felt like I, had fun playing around about recruiting instead of learning anything. But if they don't realize they're learning and they're using my vocabulary, that's like better.
Right. So. I was supposed to say that. It's like they just didn't realize that they were learning it, right? Which is even better.
Great.
So, like, what were some of those? You said like there was like the dog walker rack. Like, what were some of those? I guess like how did they go about tricking these people into learning about recruiting?
So it was a while ago. So I don't want to get the details wrong, but yeah, he had a bunch of recs that we did where we kind of went through working backwards, like this is, and he did it a little differently than kind of we actually do an intake meeting. He had a job description essentially, and then he said, okay, looking at this job description, which is like a director of dog walking, so it was like a management role. So we got like, what does a good manager do? What are traits of good managers? Kind of talking through how to evaluate all the different things, and then coming up with like open and closed-ended questions, situational questions, behavioral questions about like all of the different requirements for walking dogs or managing dog walkers.
Managing dog walkers, right.
Managing them.
Side note, I think that role probably does exist. Like there are companies that's like an app for get a dog walker. And so if you're a dog walker on that app, then someone has to manage you. So there's someone who is like overseeing probably dozens of dog walkers out there. That rec might exist.
There you go. Yeah, we thought of it because we have a pet-friendly office, and he came to visit the office and said, seems like you might need a dog walker. So there
perfect.
You go. Yeah.
So those like situational interview questions, like were those some of the, you listed off a handful there, were those some of the like the vocabulary that you were pleased people were coming out of there using?
Right. And I mean, just the way to ask different questions, like tell me about a time, in this role, it says like, or probably not it says on your resume because you're asking the same questions to everyone, but in your last job, talk me through your a couple wins that you're really proud of. With recruiting, the way that I would ask a lot of the questions, and when I'm interviewing recruiters, is I'll say, talk me through a few candidates that you've hired, show me their LinkedIn, like tell me how you found them or how they came to you. I mean, you've heard my whole speech about job descriptions. I really believe that inbound is a perfectly fine way to hire people. I think it's concerning if people are only hiring from inbound, but like I have a couple engineers I've hired from inbounds, and I'm really proud of that. I don't think many people do that. So show me about losses and people that you haven't been able to close. And you don't have to show me who the person was, but like tell me the story, tell me why you lost them and what you would do next time. And if you can't close them next time, how can you figure out that they're not closable earlier in the process, so you use less time? And seeing how people think through stuff like that is the kind of thing that you're doing. And for someone who's never interviewed before, constructing a question that way is a new sort of muscle to be working on. We're a startup, so we have a lot of people who are kind of first-time interviewers who have been thrust into positions where they're like a subject matter expert, and they need to start figuring out how to do that. We don't have a ton of first-time managers, which I think is good. And we've put all of our managers through a comprehensive, 6-week training, which is also really important, not for interviewing specifically, but just for overall management skills, which is, I think, a big deal and speaks well of Mode. Again, I just love where I work.
Let the record show that you love your job.
Right.
Wait, so is there a stigma against inbound candidates?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, Intello started as a sourcing product, right? You guys have to understand.
Well, so I guess so the thing is that you kind of open the floodgates, right? Like anyone can click that apply now button. So then is the problem though like poor candidates, or is the problem just being able to like go through them? Because as you say, like you found some engineering candidates that you're really proud of having hired. So I imagine that while there's all kinds of jamokes are going to press apply now, like there will be really good candidates in there somewhere.
Yeah, I think there's often a feeling that if someone's looking for a job, there's got to be a reason, and it probably means that they're like not doing well in their current role, and that's an indicator of their performance that they would have at the new job. I think that's ridiculous. I think sometimes that's true. I also think sometimes you can source a candidate who's not doing well in their current role and wouldn't do well in the job that you're in right now. Inbound candidates, I think there is a real I know a ton of recruiters who tell me they never look through their inbound at all.
Really?
Or look through it like once a week. And on my team, you look through your inbound for every single role every single day.
Seems silly not to. Seems like you're like wasting leads.
Right. These are people who have told you they're interested in working at the
raising
company
their hand,
where you work. Right. And like that's incredible. So yeah, I think there's a big stigma against inbound candidates though. I think it's changing. I think a lot of the diversity initiatives and focus that people have at a lot of larger companies is more focused on inbound, or are more focused on inbound, and that has sort of adjusted things. I think a lot of events are going to be focused on bringing people in, but people will sort of view inbound often as like a database of candidates to look at later when you get really desperate, as opposed to like where to begin.
Right.
And that's not our attitude at all. I think inbound's great. But again, you can't only have referrals, you can't only have inbound, you can't only have sourced candidates. Like you need to have all of the things.
You can't neglect any channel, right? They all have to inform your pipeline, or else I feel like you're just like wasting good opportunities there.
Totally.
Cool. We're creeping up on optimal podcast length. Is there anything you want to plug? Is there anything we didn't cover that we made notes on?
Yeah, I just want people to come work for me.
Go work at Mode, especially like so. Actually, you're hiring a recruiting team, and our audience is primarily recruiters. So, plug.
Yeah, I'm hiring 2 full cycle recruiters and a recruiting coordinator, and it's a really great values-driven team, supportive hiring managers. You get to work with me, so hit me up if you're interested.
Pet-friendly office.
Pet-friendly office. Well-behaved pet-friendly.
Okay, yeah. There is a bar, of course.
Right.
All right. Yeah. Well, this has been awesome, Bailey. I'm so glad I got to meet you. Thank you for being a fan of the show, and thank you even more for coming in and chatting. This has been a blast.
Yeah, this has been great. Thanks.
And thanks for being an Intello customer.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to pay that check every year.
Oh, Bailey, you're awesome. This episode was awesome. And all of you out there in podcast land, I'm quite certain you're awesome too. I've been Rob Stevenson. You've been wonderful, talented recruiters. Have a spectacular week, and happy hunting.